Hi folks, welcome to this video, which is a short final review for your exam on the little case scenario that was posted in your course. Now this case deals with Canada Food Distribution. It's a company that's located in Brampton, Ontario, and it is unionized. And you're going to see as you read the case that there are some issues related to the environment, human resources issues related to the environment, as well as the unionization of the environment. And we're going to look at some of the things that we might identify as issues and come up with some potential solutions based on the questions in the case. So now, assuming that you've read the case, what we're going to do is we're going to go through some of the case questions. One of the things we found in the case is that initially the company didn't have a union, but then they did develop one. So the first question we had is, why do you think, or identify two reasons why you feel the employees might have voted in favor of a union? Now again, I've only asked you for two reasons, but you might come up with more. In this case, I just suggested three. First of all, we knew that they were being paid lower than other competitors that had unions. They were only making minimum wage plus a small shift bonus. So now, in order to make more than just minimum wage in the shift bonus, we find that having the union got them better wages. So that would have been a reason why they would have wanted a union. First of all, the case also said that they paid 50% of their premiums on their health care. So one of the reasons they might also want a union is to lower the premiums. The other thing is they had to buy their own safety boots and their own hard hats. So they had to come up with their own money to buy their safety equipment. And usually in unionized environments, you wouldn't have to do that. So they would have been wanted to be reimbursed for their safety clothing. So you can look back to the chapter on labor relations and unionizations, and in one of your slides it did say what the advantages were of voting of having a union. So you could probably, using the data in our case, knowing why companies would want a union, come up with these three items. But again, you only needed to come up with two. So again, you can see how we're taking the data in the case, what we talk about in the classroom, and then trying to apply it to the case. Which unions represented the employees? Well, I told you in the case it was the CAW, the Canadian Auto Workers. Now we want to look at what are the three roles of a union. So this is a little bit more general. But one of the reasons they would have wanted a union is to have the terms and conditions of their employment between union and management set by a collective labor agreement so that we know it's consistent across all employees. So a union would do that. A union would make sure that the terms and conditions of your employment are consistent amongst all employees. And again, most collective labor agreements include clauses or paragraphs that deal not just with wages, but job security and even your working conditions. We'd also want our union to help us interpret and administer the collective labor agreement. So if we had questions as employees on the collective labor agreement, whether it is a grievance process or what any processes are within a company, they might be outlined in the collective labor agreement. And if you're not sure where they are or how to interpret them, certainly by all means you can go to the collective labor agreement and sit down with your union rep and they will interpret it for you. The other thing a union wants to do is increase its membership. Obviously, people who are in a union pay union dues. So it would be crazy to think that a union doesn't want to maximize their own money, right? So one of the things they do want to do is increase membership, and for that they have certification drives. So if there are some environments that are not unionized, they may make an approach to some employees to see if they would be interested in having a union. They also try and educate their union members. Now again, I only ask them for three roles here, but we can say more. And in this case, I've just added that they're also responsible for developing educational programs for union members. For example, they might have programs where if you have certain union agreement or in the collective labor agreement, maybe there are some restrictions on time worked or overtime pay. They might have a meeting sometimes to help you interpret the collective labor agreement. So it's like a training session so that you know how to read it. We do that here at Mohawk College as well. Our union will help us if we're new to the environment to help us understand the agreement and understand what our rights and responsibilities are under the union contract. indirect. And they might also try and influence economic and social policies of government. So if they think government is going to do things that they feel will have an impact on unionization, whether it's their own union that they represent or other unions in the local community, they might help other unions to lobby the government. And again, like I said, you only needed to cite 3. I've cited here 5 things, but again, I'm only looking for 3. With reference to what we call direct and indirect compensation, we wanted you to describe the total compensation or total reward plan at Canada Food. So when we're talking direct compensation, we really mean wages, what goes in your pocket, and indirect is all that stuff that doesn't go in your pocket. So we would look at things direct, their wages, which right now, before the collective labor agreement, was minimum wage plus $1 per hour, which they got after unionization, and they also got a shift bonus before they were unionized. Indirect compensation would be their benefits. They had extended health care, life insurance, and long-term disability. So this just gives us an idea of whether or not you understand their compensation system. Now let's talk about external factors that influence the pay rate of the employees. And specifically, we were talking about employees who were pickers and they actually fulfilled orders for customers. Well, first of all, one external factor would have been the labor market. So again, when we talk about external factors, we're looking at factors that are not within the company, but outside of the company that would impact their pay rate. The labor market was one because they didn't have any difficulty finding people. So if there's an abundance of people for the work that you need, there's no incentive to pay a lot more, right? Because there's a lot of people that are out there willing to do the job. And then, of course, one external factor would be a union. When the union came in, they received $1 an hour increase. So obviously, unionization is also an external factor that influenced their pay rate. What's one internal factor that influenced their pay rate? Well, it was the simplicity of the job. The job in and of itself was not a difficult job to do, and it didn't require a lot of skills. So when jobs are simple, more routinized, not a lot of skills required, you'll find those jobs tend to pay less. Now we ask you to identify 3 additional benefits that the union that represented the employees could demand as part of their negotiations with management. So here you'd have to think about all the things we talked about in the employee benefit area that employees could have. So you know the benefits that they have. We talked about the fact that they had extended health, life insurance, and LTD. But what don't they have? Didn't seem to have a pension plan, definitely didn't have reimbursement for safety clothing. They had to pay it all, so that might be something they could demand. They didn't have a very well-defined training and education program, and they didn't seem to have a short-term disability or sick leave plan. So you might suggest those things. I only asked for 3, but you might find more. Now we ask the question, do you think the pickers have external equity in their direct compensation? That's what they're being paid. They do now. They didn't before the union, but with unionization they do. How do we know? Because prior to unionization, they were only making minimum wage plus a shift bonus. Here they're getting an extra $1 an hour, okay? And in the case told us that then brought them in line with the pickers at other unionized companies. So now we know they do have external equity. We also want you to describe a pay-for-performance plan that you might implement for the picker jobs and why you think it would be effective. So when we're thinking of this, we want to go back to the chapter that we talked about when we did pay-for-performance or performance pay. And what might we suggest? Well, first of all, one of the problems that the company had is they didn't accept any input from the employees and had to set performance targets. So back to our discussion, whether we had it in class or in the course videos you were to look at on performance plans, one of the most important things to remember in making a performance pay plan effective is to get employee input. Well, the employees didn't have any input into setting their performance targets, and right now the employees were feeling a little uncomfortable because they think the targets are set too high. And when you have targets that you think are set too high, one of the biggest problems you're going to have is the fact that employees don't think they're going to be able to meet the target, right? So clearly they want a performance pay plan that's motivating for people, right? So what they could do is they could have bonus payments When employees reach or exceed targets by a certain amount, they get more. But the idea is here, you would want to give employees input into meeting those targets. So which should the targets be? All right. And if the company feels they may be a bit higher, at least the employees would have had some input in setting them, and they could get a bonus payment as part of a performance pay plan. So if they reach or exceed the targets, they get an increase. They might also want to look at having an organization-wide plan, not just for pickers, but for everybody. Maybe they could buy stock in the company. So if a company had stock, they might say, well, you know what, you can buy stock in the company, and that would be good, because if the profits go up in the company, that might also translate into increased stock price in the stock market. So the more stock you can buy, the richer you will get. They might also have a profit sharing plan, much like, other companies do, like in our area, ArcelorMittal, Dofasco. Maybe if the company does well, employees can share in some of the profits, or even gain sharing plans. So when companies might reduce the cost of running their business, employees can share in some of those cost savings. The question always also asks, why do you think that any of these suggestions might be effective? Well, first of all, if it's going to put more money in the employee's pay, right, it's doing so because they met standards or surpassed standards, and it was also a measurement of, performance improvement. So whenever you can attach performance improvement to pay, pay should go up. And in order to earn more money, the pickers will need to perform to agreed upon standards or targets. So it's more likely that they will understand the targets, buy in, and then it'll be effective because hopefully they'll make more money if they meet those targets. Now we get into health and safety. We know here we did have some health and safety issues, but specifically, what two safety issues did you see in the case, and provide suggestions for each issue to improve the situation? I came up with 3, but again, I only asked you for 2. First of all, we found that the boxes weren't stacked properly. The pickers are not moving the boxes in a safe manner, so they're not lifting properly, and they're not moving them safely, and the forklift drivers were driving too fast and unsafely, right? So those are 2 issues. And some of the things you could suggest here is to show them how to stack the boxes properly, maybe a video. You could even use a video here or some demonstration, show and tell on how the pickers should be moving the boxes. And then forklift drivers, maybe make sure that they have a training course or supply rules on how to operate a forklift and what the speed is, the maximum speed they can go, if they're driving them with it on company premises, right? Now we look at the role of the Joint Occupational Health and Safety Committee. You'll remember that the Joint Health and Safety Committee has management and non-management members on it that represent the interests of the company and the employees. Well, one of the things that would be the role of a Joint Health and Safety Committee is to conduct inspections. We talked about this in class. And in this specific case, they can conduct inspections that would identify the boxes that aren't being stacked properly. They also have the role of notifying the supervisor to correct any situations if they do a health and safety audit or an inspection. If the company is in violation of any health and safety standards, notify the supervisor and let them know that the situation needs to be improved, and maybe even provide some suggestions on how to improve it and what to do. You could also, one of the roles of the Health and Safety Committee could be to provide training to employees on how to stack the boxes and to drive the forklifts and tow motors. Now, under the Health and Safety Act, it says here there are 4 groups of individuals that are responsible for health and safety in the workplace. What we wanted you to do is identify the 4 groups and explain whether each could be held accountable for injuries that happen in the workplace. Well, first of all, each group does have a duty to keep the workplace safe, so they can all be fined for failing to do so if the Ministry of Labor finds them in breach of that duty. So even if you're a voluntary member of the Health and Safety Committee, you could be fined if you're not doing your job as a volunteer member. So it's important that you know that before you volunteer for the committee. But that's also a reason for you to require that you get training, right? So you know what the rules and regulations are. But who are the 4 types of people who could be on that joint committee or groups within the company, I should say, that would be responsible for health and safety? Well, they would be the employees, employers, supervisors, and of course the committee itself. So any of these people could be fined as employees, as volunteer members, as supervisors, and the employer if health and safety rules aren't being followed. And particularly if we have something that happens that causes death or permanent injury to workers. Now, this next question asks you to describe management's or the owner's responsibility in the case. First of all, management, or the owner in this case, has a duty under health and safety to make sure they file government accident reports, to maintain safety records, and to provide safety training and post-safety notices. The company also has, or management also has, a duty to provide training. And we know that there's a problem in this case because the employees need to have training on the computer system and they're not getting it. And management also has to work with employees to set the performance standards. They should be giving employees an opportunity to give input into the performance targets. In number 13 here, it says identify the steps that should be taken to enact a progressive discipline policy. We talked about this in one of our chapters that looked at, managing relationships with employees. First of all, employees would be given a verbal warning by the supervisor, and to keep the workplace safe. Again, we're going back to the example when the boxes are not packed correctly and how to do that correctly. So maybe they'll be shown or told verbally that something's not right and shown how to fix it. If it's still not fixed, then maybe the company would give the employees a written warning. You're still, committing infractions. And then if they're still doing it after a written warning, they might suspend them. And as we said in class, it's with pay is best, but it can be without pay. And again, we said the reason for doing it with pay is largely so that you get the employee focusing not on, how am I going to make my payments that are due tomorrow on my mortgage, on my phone or whatever, but thinking about the issue at hand, which is, I need to do something better. And what should I be doing? And then, of course, if the event happens again after the suspension and the employee is called back, then it might be time to discharge the employee. That's usually for a fourth offense, but you know what? Some companies have policies that allow them to do it much more quickly, maybe even after a third infraction. But that depends on the company's policy. Now, we also saw here in the case that the supervisors were legally or were randomly drug testing employees at the beginning of shift. So, is it legal for them to do it, and what are the circumstances under which the company can randomly drug test? So, we did talk about this in one of our later chapters, or it was posted in your videos. The supervisors and management can't randomly drug test at will. It is legal. Its testing is only legal if it's rationally connected to the performance of the job. So in other words, there might be circumstances whereby, if somebody, has a drinking problem and they're driving a school bus, that could be an issue. So you might want to randomly test because obviously they can't perform their job well, or there's a huge safety risk if they are drinking. The other time when you can test is if it's honest and good faith belief that it's necessary for the fulfillment of a work-related purpose. So again, if you need to know that people need to be drug-free or alcohol-free, any substance-free, in order to fulfill their work-related obligations properly and to standard, then you might do it. And if it's reasonably necessary to the accomplishment of a work-related purpose, so we would expect in order to complete the job, you would have to be free of drugs. Right? So again, sometimes that depends on the dosage of drugs. I mean, to be honest, we know that people are taking drugs on an ongoing basis, right? For medical ailments, there could be medicinal reasons for having marijuana or whatever, but we have to make sure that those dosages aren't so high that they might cloud your judgment on the job, right? So again, that's the only time they can test. It has to really relate more, as you can see in these three things, to a work-related purpose. Now we get more into performance management, and we look at the 3 behaviors or traits of the pickers that we should be assessing. Okay, if we were doing performance management, well, we might want to look at error rates. So in other words, if you're picking orders or fulfilling orders and you're giving a customer the wrong order, we need to obviously think about that. We would want to make sure that our pickers are fulfilling orders that are error-free or virtually error-free. We might also look at accident rates. So again, if accident rates are down in the area, that might be because of good health and safety practices by some or all of the pickers, and we'd want to acknowledge that. And again, if they follow safety rules, that would be another thing that you could assess, how well they follow the rules. 4 other groups of people that could provide performance feedback for the pickers. Well, it could be a supervisor. It could be the pickers themselves, self-assessment, right? It could also be your peers, people who work with you at the same level, and even the customers on the accuracy of the orders, right? So are customers happy with the order that they're getting? Not in terms of quality, but is it the correct order, right? That's what the picker's responsible for. They're responsible for giving you the correct order. Now, can the pickers, we find in the case that some of them walked off the job, and can they legally do that because of their lack of computer system training? You remember in the case, some of them are getting very frustrated with the fact that the computer system, they didn't understand it, they couldn't use it, and one person just walked off the job. You can't do that. It's known as a Wildcat Strike. It's illegal. Management could fire any employees that walked off the job. And in particular, if the union finds out that you've walked off the job and the union didn't sanction that for employees to do that, right? And again, unions would make management aware of that possibility. Your union wouldn't support you either. So your union would probably not be in your corner if you walked off the job illegally. So again, you have to consider that. In this final question here, we ask you if the company completed a job evaluation process for its 50 employees at the head office and analyzed each job would be assigned a number of points and would be placed into a pay grade. We had a chapter on this where we discussed this in compensation. We want you to identify and explain 2 ways that the company can decide on the actual dollar amount that they're going to pay people. Well, you remember we talked about 2 different methods. They can do a pay survey externally to see what competitors or other companies in the area are paying, because you wouldn't want an employee leaving you for the same job just because they're making more 2 blocks away. Right? You've invested all this time recruiting, selecting, orientating, training them, and now you're going to lose that investment. So the company would want to do an external pay survey, but they'd also want to do an internal one, right? So they'd want to make sure that they're paying you fairly and consistently with what other people are making. So if you were an administrative assistant, okay, you would want to make sure that you're paid fairly relative to other administrative assistants in your company. If you were an administrative assistant and then we had a marketing coordinator, we probably wouldn't expect that an administrative assistant would make more than a marketing coordinator unless they had been there for so many more years than a coordinator. But we realize that it takes more skill, effort, and responsibility to maybe be a marketing coordinator than perhaps an administrative assistant. So a little more knowledge required in some aspects, a little more responsibility sometimes. So you might find that maybe a marketing coordinator who's been there 15 years might get paid more than an administrative assistant who's maybe been on their job for 5 or 6 years, right? So we want to make sure that internally we're paying people fairly. So we would look at what other job classifications earned and how much on average they're paid and compare their point scores. So what does a marketing coordinator score in terms of points versus an admin assistant to see if the equivalency of points relates to their pay level? Okay, and that concludes our short review of the case part of the review. So hopefully you found this helpful, and if you have any questions before the exam, feel free to send me an email. Have a nice day.